The great battle is underway. Millions of lives hang in the balance. Hundreds of millions of people risk becoming refugees in what may well be the greatest migration event in human history. The world economy may teeter, entire nations disappear. As in all wars, animals and plants will suffer, as thousands of species will become extinct. No place on the face of the earth will be left untouched, from the upper limits of the atmosphere to the deepest ocean floors. So what will cause this? Well, the climate crisis brought about by a range of human practices. To mitigate as best we can the above and a great many more consequences, we need, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other experts, to limit global warming to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius. To do this, something like 88% of the Earth's coal reserves, 35% of its oil, and 52% of its natural gas must remain in the ground unextracted. The problem is that these resources are of enormous economic value. Some of the wealthiest companies on the planet are in the fossil fuel business. For the most part, they primarily measure their worth not in terms of money in the bank, but rather by the value of unextracted fossil fuels that they control. If we mandated that the above percentages of these resources remain in the ground, it would be of a staggering cost to these companies. Imagine you have $100 in the bank, and being faced with the prospect that 88% of it could never be taken out. For all practical purposes, you would now have $12, not $100. You would not likely be very pleased. Not surprisingly, these companies are not at all happy. Consequently, these fossil fuel companies have doubled down and are now fighting for their financial interests rather than those of the planet and its life, including human beings. When I said that a great battle was currently underway, this is what I meant: a battle between the fossil fuel industry and its many affiliates and champions, such as politicians who it funds, and on the opposing side, a range of individuals who want to act quickly and decisively to mitigate the climate crisis, thereby keeping the Earth as welcoming and habitable as possible for human and a range of other beings which we share the planet with. So, have you ever wondered how climate change became such a political issue, such a battleground in America? Like everything else, this has a history. While we can see it as a long history spanning decades, the last dozen or so years has been incredibly important. The documentary A Climate of Doubt and the other documentary we were looking at, Merchants of Doubt, both take up this history, though in somewhat different ways. A Climate of Doubt, which is a PBS Frontline documentary, chronicles a decisive moment in American history when the politicalization of climate change came to a head. Although the film is now 8 years old, it is of historical interest as it chronicles when the tide began to turn in favor of fossil fuel interests. While you might have been under the impression that this sea change took place with the election of Donald Trump in 2016, the situation really goes back a few years further. Here is how the filmmakers described their documentary in 2012. 4 years ago, the climate crisis was hot. Politicians from both parties, pressed by an anxious public, seemed poised to act. But that was then. Today, and they mean 2012, public opinion about the climate crisis has cooled, and politicians either ignore the issue or loudly proclaim their skepticism of scientific evidence that human activity is imperiling the planet. What's behind this reversal? Frontline, that's the group that made this documentary, goes inside the organizations that fought the scientific establishment, environmental groups, and lawmakers to shift the direction of the debate on climate issues, and they redefine the politics of global warming. But how exactly is this battle being fought? At first glance, this may seem like a battle for scientists to wage with the fossil fuel interests. However, the underlying science is no longer seriously in question. As you may have heard, I mentioned this fact elsewhere in the series, and the paper that introduced it has been referenced by media more than any other climate change document. A 2013 study that looked at roughly 12,000 journal articles dealing with climate change found that 97% of these scientists concluded that it is real, that it's underway, and is principally anthropogenic. Instead, this is largely, as amazing as it may sound, a battle of words, a debate on whether the climate crisis is real or not, being staged for the public. Ultimately, as years pass and the real-world consequences of anthropogenic climate change become impossible to deny, fossil fuel companies and their allies will lose this war. However, each year that they sway public opinion away from the truth regarding climate change and keep us from acting on that knowledge, the more severe will be the consequences, as many more trillions of pounds of fossil fuels will annually be extracted and burned while we wait. From the point of view of the fossil fuel industry, their goal is to take every last dollar that they possibly can out of the ground before legislation hampers them from doing so. How much will be extracted? Well, quite a few depends on this debate over the nature and validity of the climate change crisis. What is fascinating here is that this is really no longer a debate. The scientists, researching this issue have, long concluded beyond any reasonable doubt, and they certainly don't, debate it anymore among themselves, that anthropogenic climate change represents a real pressing and significant global danger. Nonetheless, a media spectacle is being staged by fossil fuel interests with the goal of influencing public opinion. Unlike many debates, winning opinion to one side or another isn't necessarily their goal. True, on the one hand, scientists would like to convince us all that anthropogenic climate change is indeed real. But as far as the climate change deniers are concerned, all that matters is that the broad swath of the American public is confused or unsure whether human beings are indeed significantly causing the climate crisis, or whether it's a significant problem for humanity. In this sense, their goal is to create doubt, as an individual doubting the validity and scope of a problem is unlikely to make sweeping life changes and support the spending of trillions of tax dollars in an effort to remedy it. In their 2010 book, Merchants of Doubt, two historians, Naomi Orestes and Eric Conway, explored how effective campaigns of disinformation were waged by tobacco and fossil fuel interests in order to block government interventions into their industries. Surprisingly, as Merchants of Doubt made clear, these two campaigns used some of the same rogue scientists to build their case as was used by the tobacco industry. In 2014, a documentary of the same name was made about the book. Here is how the filmmakers describe Merchants of Doubt as a documentary. It takes us and the audience on a satirically comic yet illuminating ride into the heart of conjuring American spin. Filmmakers Robert Kenner lifts the curtain on the secretive group of highly charismatic, silver-tongued pundits for hire who present themselves in the media as scientific authorities, yet have the contrary aim of spreading maximum confusion about well-studied public threats ranging from toxic chemicals to pharmaceuticals to climate change. So, I'm curious to hear what you thought about either or both of these documentaries, these two doubt documentaries, and the battle that's currently underway for the support of the American public.